So, Abhijit, in the case of Balakot strike, we have seen that India basically called the bluff of the Pakistan, the nuclear bluff of the Pakistan. So, how do you see this nuclear standoff between India, Pakistan, and China unfolding in the future? And will that have, defining impact on how the wars will be fought in the coming decades? Because I think we have just opened up a window of limited war under the nuclear overhang. How true is that?
So this was something that was discussed very often by the Pakistanis. We should actually thank the Pakistanis for this, that they went on insisting that limited war under the nuclear umbrella is possible, right? And they proved it literally 1 year after we had Operation Shakti, when they invaded Kargil, for all effects and purposes, occupied Kargil. And they thought they were being too smart by half, right? Since then, what we've shown them is that we can actually conduct a fairly deep strike inside Pakistan. Now, remember, the idea of nuclear deterrence is almost like a nation state. It's an imagined identity or an imagined myth in that sense, which you need to keep in place in order to hold up this myth of nuclear deterrence. Remember, the UK was a nuclear power when Argentina attacked the Falkland Islands and took it over, right? Similarly, there is a lot of uh, evidence to show that it wasn't the nuclear weapons by themselves that led to Japan's surrender to America. It was actually a combination of events. The Soviets having declared war, the fear of the they any day preferred an American occupation to a Soviet occupation. The fact, amazingly, the fire bombings that the Allies carried out, that the Americans carried out of Tokyo, killed more people than the nuclear bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So, it wasn't as straightforward as we're led to believe that nuclear deterrence prevents war. And you've also seen, of course, North Korea, right? With North Korea, you've seen how many provocations they do against everybody. South Korea is technically under the American nuclear umbrella, yet the North Koreans will go sink a South Korean ship. Remember the Chonan incident where they sank a South Korean frigate and things like that. And there's very little you can do. Similarly, the Chinese keep challenging Japanese sovereignty over the Diaoyu Islands, Senkaku in Japanese islands, and Japan is technically under under the American nuclear umbrella. Similarly, the Chinese and Indians, we have exchanged blows in Galwan, as you see, and that's also been under the nuclear umbrella. So what we're realizing is it's also quite dangerous in that sense, because you're slowly creating a bigger and bigger and bigger gap of action under the nuclear umbrella. And you really don't know when somebody is going to go pop. The real secret is how much can you hurt a nuclear country without making it panic? Because a nuclear first strike is essentially a panic reaction, in the sense where you fear that your conventional forces are going to get crushed. Then you respond with a nuclear strike. It is to prevent conventional failure. So it's very important that we understand that. And air power, once upon a time, air power used to be seen as a very imprecise instrument, like the firebombing of Dresden, which killed off so many Germans. The Allied raids on Tokyo, for example, that again killed off so many people. So it was seen as very imprecise. Today, air power has become so precise. You saw with the way terrorists get taken out. You can literally target a jeep. One jeep in a convoy of 10 to 15 jeeps, you can precisely target it. In that sense, it's almost one of the reasons we worship Ganesha. He's seen as the Lord of discrimination. Discrimination in the sense, fine distinction, great nuance, is because the trunk of an elephant is strong enough that it can uproot a tree, but it is also so fine that it can pick up a single blade of grass. And that is invariably what air power is becoming today. It can inflict both a lot of damage and it can do extreme precision strike as well. So that's a very important aspect. Again, air power is enabling, and precision strike, even naval or ground precision strike, is enabling a huge amount of latitude in terms of opening up the war space under the nuclear umbrella.
Hmm. But coming to India and Pakistan, what is their current nuclear doctrine? Because India has also made certain statements in the past that we are ready to rethink the first no first use doctrine, or this doctrine does not apply to the nuclear powers. And what is the Pakistan's position now after Balakot?
See, unfortunately, in India, people don't realize this, but we have an extremely indisciplined a form of government and an extremely indisciplined setup of the National Security Council. So you had the former National Security Advisor Shiv Shankar Menon create a lot of mischief when he used this term "no first strike against non-nuclear states," implying that you will have a first strike against nuclear states, which officially violated your doctrine. But see, the point here is very simple. Everybody who knew how the Manmohan Singh government was working knew that Manmohan Singh didn't have any power and Shiv Shankar Menon had even lesser power. He was trying to carve out a space for himself, right? So all these kind of statements were necessary to keep giving attention to him, even when the Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry would just deny his requests for information. They just flat out blackball him every time he asked for information. Since this government took over, they've actually been slightly more careful, but not that much more careful. Because what happened was the BJP, before its 2014 victory, issued a statement saying we will relook the no first strike, no NFU in the no first use in the nuclear doctrine. They didn't do that. They haven't revised the doctrine, which in itself is quite a bad sign because, every French president is required to restate the nuclear doctrine when he or she takes office, which in India isn't. We're still laboring under a 2001 document. People believe it's the 1998 document that is the nuclear doctrine. It is not. That was merely an advisory paper. The 2001 statement of cabinet that came out is the official doctrine. And for the last 20 years, we have not revised the doctrine, which is highly problematic. Okay, it actually reduces deterrence because deterrence has many components. It has the validity of your technology, which is called technological deterrence. It's called human deterrence, which is your leadership willing to use the nuclear weapon? And Manmohan Singh said, "What point is a nuclear weapon?" Which really eroded your human deterrence massively. You can't have leaders making statements like that. Then you have there's several things that go into the credibility of your deterrent in that sense. So there was that aspect. And then what happened was Manohar Parikarji, when he was minister, raised some purely theoretical points during the book launch of Gurmeet Singh's book, the late General Gurmeet Singh's book in IDSA. And again, the nuclear does not come under the defense minister. It comes under the PMO. The only person realistically who is allowed to make a statement on this is the PM. Because understand, even the National Security Advisor, when you read the 2001 doctrine, the National Security Advisor only carries out the attack. He has no ability to decide the targets. He has no ability to decide the doctrine. He is not empowered to decide the doctrine. He is not empowered to decide the targets. He is empowered to do nothing except carry out the strike. Okay, the only person empowered to decide the targets, the doctrine, the structure is the Prime Minister. And to date, no Prime Minister has made a statement except for Manmohan Singh saying what use is a nuclear weapon. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, but the way foreign academia works is unko dhanda chalana hai na, unless they have something new to say every 15 seconds, because tenure depends on how many peer-reviewed papers you produce. So they will try to see profundity and meaning where none exists. So you'll see a lot of this garbage come up.
But what of Pakistan's nuclear position now after Balakot?
Their position hasn't changed. So, they have something called 4 thresholds, which is the economic threshold. If we cause too much economic damage on them, they will go nuclear, first use. They believe in a nuclear first strike. They believe in using tactical weapons. They don't call them tactical weapons. They call them low yield short-range weapons, which are used on a battlefield. But for them, it's an economic threshold, a military threshold. So if we destroy too much of their military, and mind you, this is the key phrase, too much of their military. So you can destroy significant parts of their military without it being too much of their military, and they still won't use nuclear weapons. They have a geographic threshold, which is you can capture some territory, but if you capture too much territory, they will go nuclear, right? And the fourth one, I forget now.
Basically, we
But
can capture Kashmir.
uh, if we manage to, but Kashmir is a horribly difficult battlefield. It's lots of valleys, up, down, heavily forested. That's like getting into a Vietnam-like situation. It's a lot worse than Vietnam. Much higher mountains and things not advisable. So even with Pakistan, there's been no change. But remember, the Pakistani arsenal isn't simply to deter India. It's also a blackmail tool to get the West to keep investing in Pakistan to prevent its collapse as a state.
Yes.
Right. So the blackmail function of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal is probably more significant, and they need to make a credible threat against India so that West takes Pakistan more seriously and prevents it from becoming a failed state. That's the main use. Think of it as an oblique attack. It's actually meant to be attacking. It's actually meant for a different purpose, but the stated purpose and the drama is all directed towards it.
Interesting, Abhijit. Interesting.